There was one permanent pack bed in the third floor hydro room on 125D, and my mother had been its regular long-term occupant. By the end of 1955, she had spent 628 hours and 30 minutes wrapped in a wet sheet, stuffed into temporary submission and control. I wrote the book Regina's Record so my mother wouldn't be forgotten. She was a patient from 1951 to 1983 when she died. And this is a story of her life and part of mine. There are stories that need to be talked about, and we need to flush them out and bring them to the surface. At the end of World War II, my mother was diagnosed with schizophrenia, so they knew about schizophrenia, they just didn't know what to do about it. Things got bad in the house, and my grandmother became concerned about that. And so my grandmother made the decision they had to do something. They didn't know what to do, but she had gone to a doctor in town, and he didn't know what to do. So they had a court hearing, and my uncles and my grandparents went with my mother, and they committed her to Fergus Falls State Hospital. Well, this is the first chapter. It takes place in our front yard. The man and my grandfather left the yard with Mother between them. They made their way past the well pump toward the driveway, the edge of the creamery ruins. I ran from the tree, then followed Grandma's retreat to the house. She seemed to fall forward, weeping as she returned to her doubt and pain in the porch kitchen. Then the stranger's voice called to me, "Say, be a good boy, bring that shoe." When we reached the car, I stood near its running board, gave my mother's shoe to the man, who surprised me with candy. "Take it, Sonny," he said. "She'll be back before you can say Jack Robinson." Mother was in the back seat. I dared not look at her face for fear she was watching, might say I shouldn't accept candy. The car turned into our driveway, backed out left, and disappeared, then reappeared behind the sweep of corn stubble north of our house. The candy was green, yellow, and white, coconut in a clear wrapper. I parted the wrapper, slid one piece off the white holder, nibbled, and said Jack Robinson 3 times. "Jack Robinson," I said. "Jack Robinson. Jack Robinson." She never came home again after that. There's an otherness about growing up without your mother, and I'm glad I had my grandmother who raised me, and she was good to me. When I was about 15 years old, she said, "I don't think your mother is going to come out of the institution," and so she didn't have much insight into mental illness, but she was humble enough to know that there are some people who do get sick. My mother was the first veteran to be taken out of state to another hospital, and to a veterans hospital. They called around and they found a hospital in North Chicago, and that's where she went, and that's when trouble began. First, when I got the records, it took me 7 years to get them, but when I got them, I was delighted because they wrote down what my mother said. But then on closer examination, I began to realize that these were records were dark secrets. I was furious. I couldn't believe it. I was shocked at just about everything that was done. I was in a grad program at the time, finishing an MFA. I used it for my thesis and won a couple awards with that. And then 12 versions later, I ended up selling the book to a publisher. I was trying to capture the whole essence of this 32-year span of life that my mother had. She was in the hospital over half her life. The records just were mind-blowing. They took her up to the ward, they stripped her clothes off, and they wrapped her in a wet sheet. And then they put her on a slotted bed, and they put wet sheets on top of her to control any movement whatsoever. Then it went to shock treatment, ECTs, electroconvulsive therapy, and they started doing that on a regular basis with her. They wanted control, and she didn't give it to them. She was a feisty veteran who didn't want shock treatment. She didn't want the treatment she had. And when they said they were going to have a lobotomy, they did it. They just kept it a secret, basically. And she got worse as time went on, and it just was one of those things where people were put away and forgot. She died of pulmonary edema and after a broken hip. My Aunt Florence, she asked questions and questioned the amount of medication my mother was taking, but nobody else in the family asked questions about what her treatment was and what it was like or anything like that. And if they did, they never told me about it because it was a shame to have mental illness and that kind of thing. So during those days, the family was frightened about becoming institutionalized or being locked up or that kind of thing. So and then of course nobody talked about it, and I certainly didn't. So I tried to fake it, with a busy head and a screaming mind and voices and images and that kind of thing. I tried to keep that to myself. And I was in the military at the time, so that's when the schizophrenia showed up, basically. I was stationed in Arlington National Cemetery, so I was a perfect soldier up to a certain point, and then I had voices. They gave me a test, and they said, "Does anybody else in your family have mental illness?" And I was embarrassed about my mother, so I put no. And they said, "We think you ought to go to Walter Reed." And I was given an honorable discharge, by the way, and so I lived with the voices and the images, hallucinations. I was self-medicating. I was drinking, and I wanted to get my head clear. They took me to the St. Cloud VA, and that's where I was a patient for 4 months. And the doctor there was pretty good. He got my number, but I didn't get any real help there. I just wanted out, basically. And when I went back, years later, they re-diagnosed me with schizophrenia. I had my last drink of alcohol when I was on July 26, 1974. And so I had to get away from alcohol first, and then the other stuff later came with schizophrenia and that kind of stuff. If it wasn't for centered wife, I would have been in trouble too. The two smartest things I do every day are not take a drink of alcohol and take my medication. So the medication has made a tremendous difference, you'd say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It has, yeah.
And my wife can testify to the fact that I'm 70 to 80% better on medications than I would be if I didn't have them. And by the way, I'm treated very well by the Minneapolis VA and the local clinic here in town. Family all knows I have schizophrenia. They knew from when they were kids that there was a problem, but really we're doing more talking about it now, today, than we have in the past. There's some discrimination basically on people who are mentally ill, and there's a lot of words for people being sick, and we have a lot of them in our vocabulary that we need to get rid of, basically. You do hear the stories of people who do sometimes, in rare instances, commit crimes and hurt people. The media is negative in that area, and you don't hear about the regular guy, the regular gal that is suffering from mental illness that lives down the street. I think it's going to get better as time goes on. Part of this deal, talking like this, is to spread the word. The treatment today is much better than what my mother suffered through and what other people have suffered through. We have to uncover, discover, and discard what we learn about mental illness, basically, and because we need to keep talking about it, we need to keep dialoguing, and we need to keep writing about it. It's not going to be a big deal at some point.